huge fan of the horror comedy An American Werewolf in London, I was more than a little excited to get the opportunity to interview one of its stars, Jenny Agutter, some years ago in a London hotel room. Jenny was holding interviews for the special edition release of American Werewolf, and I was lucky enough to snag myself a place and a good half an hour with Jenny. Jenny Agutter has the sort of film career most people can only dream of, with credits including Logan's Run, The Railway Children, the hugely controversial Walkabout, and even appearances in the MCU in Avengers and Captain America the Winter Soldier. Her TV credits are just as impressive, with appearances in much-loved shows such as Magnum PI, Murder, She Wrote, The Equalizer, Red Dwarf, and most recently as Sister Julienne in Call the Midwife. Jenny talked openly with me about American Werewolf in London, about the director John Landis, who also directed Michael Jackson's Thriller video, her controversial movie Walkabout, which was previously banned, and what it was like filming a sex scene with co-star David Naughton when David had a crush on her at the time. Jenny opens up on American Werewolf in London like she's never done before. Jenny, John Landis is one of my all-time favourite directors. Being a huge Michael Jackson fan as I am, and him having directed Thriller, the greatest music video of all time, I'd love to know what he's like as a director to work for.
He's a terrific actor for an actor. Whatever. He brings a huge amount of energy to a film set. To make films, it's about, it's boring as watching paint dry. But you normally have these little tiny bits of films to do, go off, you're waiting, you mind, you come back, the energy dies, and you hope that you can find something that keeps it going for each scene. John Landis never lets that happen. I mean, he's constantly telling stories. You kind of remain on set because you're just talking and he's doing things, and talking about the scenes, talking about stuff, he's telling jokes. So it has an extraordinary flow to it. It's very high energy. So I think that's always apparent, and it helps you enormously in that because it keeps you on your toes. And also I think he has very good. He wrote An American Werewolf, and he's very good at recognising people and the way they are, and what's real, what's not real, with the act, what's real, what's not real. And you feel very secure that he's actually going to make choices that make sense for a character and not leave you with egg on your face. It's looking rather strange. And he does odd things like he would do a take and then he'll immediately go on and not cut and start again, which is again when things kind of slide because you stop and start again. He'll just go, okay, go. Yeah, just do that moment. So you come right in and do it. And often, because it's at the moment, it has a completely different reaction to it, which he'll use. So it's very, very good fun.
That leads me on to another question about John Landis. Does he let his actors improvise their lines during filming, as some directors do?
I think that it was a fairly worked script, actually, American Werewolf. But he does encourage almost like improvisation, which is that the sense of the moment should be absolutely happening there and then, as opposed to becoming sort of prosaic and just sort of saying things that you have to say. And I'm not sure that David, what did they say? I mean, I certainly wasn't improvising things. It was
David and Griffin jokingly said, at least I think they were joking, said that they'd improvised the whole lot, every line in the film.
Oh, did they? They improvise everything. Nothing to do with that at all. I'm not sure about that. Let's go together. But I think he allows for things to happen, and I guess if people improvise it, if it makes sense. But See You Next Wednesday was there on the script.
An American Werewolf in Paris, the sequel. I'd heard a rumour that about the same time that film went into production, that John Landis himself was attempting to get his own sequel made that included your character, Nurse Price. What did you know about that?
It was talked about. In truth, I don't think he ever, when he wrote American Werewolf, he didn't think of it in terms of it having an ongoing story. He wrote it as a complete piece. Clearly, any film company that makes a film is always going to talk about sequels, particularly if they see something's being successful. Werewolf was successful. But so I'm not really quite sure what Landis's plans were to make another one. I'm frankly not sure, I don't know what they were. The American Werewolf in Paris was completely separate from the story, what he did.
For me, Werewolf in Paris was a very poor sequel when compared with the quality of the original.
Well, it's using a theme, and I think that does happen in lots of ways. People use a theme, but it hasn't got the same ingredients, I don't think.
No, it certainly hasn't. I mean, it doesn't have you for a start.
It's such a strange combination. I mean, I'd be very unhappy to make anything like that without Landis directing, frankly.
On the feature commentary of the DVD for American Werewolf in London, Griffin Dunn talked about how they were having problems with American work visas, including his.
Yeah, he talked about moving the whole thing. He said he could have actually. I wonder how it would have worked in Paris. I guess there are places to go to. It wouldn't be quite the malls, but they do have some very wild landscapes. When you go further south. And I think I didn't think it was just an empty threat. I think he really found it a problem because he was not going to try to make two English guys seem American, because the whole point of it was to have two really American boys to set up the whole English thing.
Can you tell me what research you had to do for the role of Nurse Price in American Werewolf?
I don't know that a lot of research was required. However, I did do some. I mean, looking back, I don't know. I mean, whether it was necessary. I went and worked for a week in a voluntary way in a hospital just to spend some time with the nurses. And I did find out quite a lot about them. And it was fascinating. I mean, anyway, it was fascinating. But it's silly things like I didn't want to be permanent with a clipboard in my hand, not really knowing what one was going to be doing with a clipboard, or whether you would indeed be doing that, and what they were like, and how they walked across the wards, and what their attitudes were, and where they were going to in between times, And so I did find out quite a lot about all that, so at least I could hold it in my mind. But he wrote A Good Relationship, which is really sort of what that's about. That a very straightforward young woman who's very sure of herself, and meets a young man who needs them taken care of.
Here's a difficult question. Most horror movies, particularly horror comedies, never seem to strike the right balance between horror and comedy, and often fail at both. Why do you think American Werewolf got it so right? Why was it so successful when most other horror films of the same genre failed?
It wasn't being frightening for its own sake. So you start off with a good story with real characters that people identify with, because you sort of recognise it. And it's sort of every man being in a bizarre situation, which is werewolves don't exist. Except in this, they do. We're not being spooked by shadows and ghosts and things. We're saying there is someone who is undead, and that there is a werewolf in the sky, going to turn a werewolf. So that's both funny, frightening, but it makes you identify, as I say, as real people with circumstances. I think its energy, its use of music and sound, it's extremely well edited. I think it had extraordinary effects. I mean, even today, with all the changes that have been in special effects, what Rick Baker did with John Landis to create the change into the werewolf was extraordinary.
Yes, so much better than the effects in Werewolf in Paris.
I didn't
CGI stuff.
Yeah. I mean, everybody today presumes everything's going to be computerized. But unless it was created in front of your eyes, nobody did. They worked on it for a long time, but I think that's part of the fascination of the book. But it is that thing. I think the main thing is the identification and sense of story and the comic aspects of it. Story well told. He also, if someone, the things that I've done that have totally been remembered and come back, they've all always started with the same kind of energy. They've always started with someone saying, I have to make this film. I am going to make this film, whatever the odds. And the three people said that. Nicholas Rowe, when we did Walkabout, he said, I'm going to make this film. I don't care whether it's a handheld camera. And I met him at first when I was 14. It was a long time before he actually had money for it. But he was totally dedicated. It was fully together. He really thought about that film before making it. It wasn't on the wing. It was a very clever script. It was a very well written script as well. Blam Jeffries, who was clearly so determined that he was going to have certain ingredients, he was going to put that film together. He was totally clear-headed about it. And he knew what that story was. And again, he'd done a very good script for it. And with John Landis, he wrote that story when he was 19. He was determined he was going to make that film. And he talked about it years before when I met him. He said, I'll play the nurse, and it'll be really good. And unfortunately, the producers wanted me to do it, and I gave up, so it was just as well.
So incidentally, how did you meet John Landis?
Through an actor friend. And I met he and his wife Deborah. And the two of them were young people in Hollywood, very, very bright, really interested in film. John's a real movie buff, and he really knows everything.
Yeah, and it really shows through in his films as well.
Yeah, because if you know yourself about movies, you can see all sorts of references to things. They became good friends, so great people.
Oh, speaking of Rick Baker and the Oscar-winning special effects for David's transformation sequence, how pleased were you that you didn't have to go through a werewolf transformation sequence like that?
Very, very pleased. I was also very pleased not to be Griffin Dunn, come in and have my makeup done from 5:30 in the morning for 3 hours to look as hideous. Yeah, no, that's I would. I guess maybe werewolf would have been better than being Griffin's job, because that was an everyday job. Whereas there was only one transformation. I guess it is quite interesting to do, but I think it's really hard work.
And I think Michael Jackson voluntarily did both the werewolf transformation sequence and sported the zombie makeup in John Landis' Thriller.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but he's gone through all sorts of transformations as well anyway.
David Naughton, in the feature commentary, mentioned how he'd seen you perform in a play before you acted together in An American Werewolf, and that he'd had a massive crush on you before meeting you in person and acting together. Were you aware of this at the time?
His memory fails him slightly. He did see me in a theatre play, which was Equus, but I actually played in the movie. So what he actually saw was what he remembers as the film, which was very theatrically shot.
I see. So how did it make you feel when you were acting alongside him when he had a massive crush on you?
He never told me that.
He never told you that? Really?
No.
He says he did.
No, he says he told me.
Yeah, he says he told you.
Did he? Well, I don't remember him telling me that. Maybe my memory's playing out. To relax, he had a couple of beers before we did the scene in bed together.
As do all men, I think.
Because it's nerve-wracking to listen anyway, because it's sort of highly technical to do with placing the camera and having the whole camera team around you. Feeling extremely awkward, trying to make something look very seductive and relaxed, which it isn't. But no, it's good fun. I mean, you spend a lot of time together, and anything that's said like that is taken with a pinch of salt.
You've played a lot of different roles over the years, including some very strong female characters. But how well do you think the role of Alex in American Werewolf was written?
She's actually very well written, and that really is what was appealing. If I had any worries about whether it would work or it wouldn't work, you then look and say, because it hadn't been in the film, it hadn't been done. You then look and say, well, this is a character that's worth playing. And really, it was a good character. Very well fleshed out, and totally made sense. And yes, her judgment of men may have been a little bit skew-where. There's an awful lot of people that get taken in by men that they think are one when they turn out to be another. So it's not, it's not hard reach that. And I did ask Landis at the end of the night. So who am I speaking to now? And I say I love you at the end. I mean, am I talking to the wall? Right? And John said, no. You're talking to David. So you're just looking at me. And of course, the way it's cut together is I look down there, and his transformed, and he's the wolf. So I go, I love you, and this creature goes, it's very funny. Because I'm totally sincere, saying it to a wolf.
Yeah, and I was really expecting a happy ending at that point.
Yeah, I know. It is extraordinary that he managed to do that. Because it isn't. It really isn't. And it just goes. And just, that's it. They shoot him.
And then the joyful music kicks in.
And
David Naughton also mentioned on the commentary that they were disappointed with the film's reaction from the critics, especially from the New York Times. What memories do you have from the press reactions to American Werewolf?
I remember them being fairly favourable, actually. I don't know that they were bad. Naughton may have expected, I don't know whether he just felt people didn't appreciate enough what went behind making it, and the creation of the characters and all the rest of it. But I thought that, I don't know, to tell you the truth, I don't actually involve myself a huge amount in reading criticisms, because I've done both theatre and film, and the fact is, if you start reading things and they're good reviews, you believe that and you're lost, and then you read bad reviews, and you think that's true, and you read that and you're lost. So you take it things off. But my impression was that it generally was liked by the journalists and the writers. There may well have been people that played it, but it certainly went bad. I know that Landis has a reputation as a commercial filmmaker, and that's always hard for filmmakers not to be taken seriously. In many ways, there are quite serious aspects to as a film, as filmically how it is made. American Werewolf is really quite interesting, but always those things play out in the long run. Walkabout did not have good reviews when it came out. They didn't know what they were reviewing, and in fact, I think it was Canby who rewrote his review and actually wrote a piece saying, that he wanted to re-review it and talked about it 6 months or a year later. Didn't help at the time, but some people said startling, extraordinary. Other people didn't get it, didn't know what was going on at all. But time tells in those things, which is the fact if something remains for whatever reasons, people revisit, rewrite, talk about whatever, and it gets looked at differently. American Werewolf's done that, and it's a classic. I think it's a classic movie.
You're in good company there. There's a history of great films getting bad reviews when they first came out, as the critics just didn't understand them. Films such as Psycho and Blade Runner, for example.
Yeah, that's right. People really didn't like Psycho. That's right. Yeah, so, you can't often tell. Time tells whether a film works or doesn't really work.
What in your career do you consider the highlight or the work that you're most proud of?
Probably things that people haven't seen, like Sweet William was a wonderful thing to do. It was Belle Bainbridge's story. It was a great opportunity to play somebody who had all these peculiar aspects to her personality, which one can find and play. And that was she had a very odd relationship with somebody who, like American Werewolf, didn't quite reveal who they were. There was an awful lot of discoveries going on about the layers to which the relationships that this man she was with had with other people. And it's because it's Belle Bainbridge, it's very funny. And it was great to do. And then there are things that I've done on stage that I really enjoyed doing, like Reagan and King Lear. Because she was thoroughly dark and bad. And there is something fascinating about looking at those aspects and playing them as a person. It's quite interesting to play them. And at the same time I did a play called Arden of Faversham, which is about a woman, contemporary Shakespeare, so similar time, but you sort of can take these people out of their period, who had 8 attempts at murdering her husband. Not very nice. But again, fascinating to play. Clearly someone who was driven.
And now I guess you probably know what I was talking about if I were to say the words, see you next Wednesday.
The movie. The movie within the movie.
Yes.
And John Landis put that as the pornographic film. Which was always always has. And he's had it in other films.
Yeah, he's included it in a lot of his films.
Yeah.
Including Michael Jackson's Thriller video.
He just moved by.
Blues Brothers as well. He stopped doing it now, though.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, people started spotting it far too easily.
Try and put it in very, very subtle ways. That Hitchcock shadow.
Now, I know photography is a huge passion of yours, and you've published your own photography book called Snap. Do you have any plans to publish any more of your photography?
I did have, but I actually haven't had a camera apart from an Instamatic in my hand for a while. I take a lot of kind of easy advantage type shots, the family shots, but I haven't really properly handled any photography. I'm still fascinated by it. I still go to exhibitions and see what's going on, but it's like drawing anything. If you're not actually doing it, you're not getting on with that particular craft, and there just isn't time.
So no plans for the future?
Maybe. I mean, I love getting involved in things that are on the other side of the camera, whether it's still camera or in production.
So, classic interview question coming up. Apologies in advance for this one. What has been the greatest challenge in your life so far, either personal or professional?
The biggest change in my life is getting married, because it requires a huge change in oneself, particularly since I thought of myself as a completely independent person up until the age of 37, when I got married. Leading my life absolutely as I wanted to do it, and being accused of actually being very selfish because I just did whatever I wanted to do. And then one is blessed with the possibility of having somebody else in your life. And accommodating that is both enormous joy and an enormous challenge. It does make you realise that the way you want to do something isn't necessarily the only way to do it. You may end up thinking that it's the only right way to do it, but you're challenged as to how you then get on that. So it's the pleasure of finding out all the ways of accommodating someone in one's life, and I guess it has been.
So learning to make compromises.
Yeah, it's funny. You don't sort of see it as compromise before you do it, because it's not. It's really not compromising, because you have to be. You end up kind of getting involved wholeheartedly. You just find out that there are other ways, and you just have to drop the thing about being absolutely sure that you're determined only one way. It's not compromising. You're not saying, okay, well, I didn't really like to do that, but I will do it because. It's actually going, well, I would do that this way. Oh, all right. All right, we can do this another way. Or I wouldn't. It's also the joy of someone bringing something completely different into your life. I remember getting to New York one time. It's 6 o'clock. It's already sort of night time, 11 o'clock your time. My husband says, we could go to the opera. And I go, yes, but we could rest. And that's a really good idea. He says, it's a good idea, but that's why we'll go to the opera. And it makes me laugh. It's completely insane, and it's nothing I would ever think of doing. So you get to do some things that you wouldn't normally do.
Now, you've appeared in one of my all-time favourite comedies, Red Dwarf. What was it about the script for Red Dwarf that made you want to do that show?
I think it was just, it was just a very, very funny idea. It was a very funny script. And it was good fun to do something that was already had a huge cult following.
Do you receive a lot of requests to appear in comedy like that?
Well, did Lex's Sale, The Red Dwarf. I played a role in Darkman, which is kind of dark comedy, I guess. It's like a comic role. And I do like those things, yes. And Parole Officer just recently, Steve Coogan movie. I do like comedy. It's easier to do on stage when you're working with an audience, because you know whether it works or it doesn't work. And when you're in a film, you're kind of always going to try to look, is that funny? Because nobody's laughing, because everybody's either pretending to lines or they're just being quiet in the background. So you just don't know. You know where it was funny. You know it was funny in your own head, but you're not quite sure what they're going to see. So it is difficult in movies, but I like comedy. I like going to comedy groups. I'm doing something about MI5 at the moment, which is called Spooks. Yeah. I'm playing some Stella Riverton. That's great fun because it's completely different from anything I've done. And dealing with that peculiar world of espionage, albeit home-based, where people are leading life that is unanswerable to anybody, really. Things that sets up. Plus, they're jolly good dramas. Yeah. We're trying to get the gritty real as much real sense of MI5 as possible. And I also would like to do Nesbitt's story. I'm working a bit slow because of other things in getting that script out. I'm a very good writer who's working on that.
Now, you've recently settled here in London after living abroad. Is there anything you miss that you can't get in London, such as, well, the weather would be the obvious one?
This time of year, we've had sun today, but I just find the winters really hard to get through. And it's just long winters. That I miss about it? That's about the end. I mean, because my friends I can see over here as well. And there's not a society like this. I'm not one for missing things very much, actually, because I've travelled a lot as a child. And if I want to be somewhere, I'll be there. And Britain occupies so much of my time with family and projects and things that I want to be involved in. And with that, once one has a family, then you're more socially involved, which I really wasn't in MA at all. It's just, well, I think it's quite hard to have a good social setup that's reflecting on the way one feels about things in Los Angeles. So no, I don't really miss anything from that point of view, any of the comforts, anything. I do like swimming, and I do like getting in the ocean, I do like sunshine, so I was brought up with it. And I sometimes feel the more necessary. But then I get such a kick out of London. And I just think it's such an exciting city. There's so much going on all the time. There's music, mime theatre, all sorts of events, great places to go and eat, great places for art. I mean, just anything you could want. So I wish I didn't get in there, actually. You look for it, and you sort of create it.
Now, here's a loaded question to finish off with. What's the best Christmas present you've ever received? He asks, knowing you had your son on December 25th.
And what's the best thing for Christmas for my son?
Yes.
It would be hard not to.
That was a very loaded question.
It is a very, very, it is a very extraordinary thing. And he wasn't expected on Christmas Day. He was expected to be on 28th of January. So it was quite a shock.
Thank you so much for answering my questions, Jenny.
Thank you very much.
And for putting up with my fangirl moments over American Werewolf. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I've enjoyed every second of it. And to our listeners, if you've also enjoyed this interview with Jenny Agutter, please consider subscribing to this podcast and leaving me a glowing 5-star review. I would certainly appreciate it. You've been listening to the Engaging Marketeer podcast. Until next time.